Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. I'm Nicole Valentine. My background is that I come from South Africa, and I had the privilege to come and live in your beautiful country 20 years ago to work for the World Health Organization's headquarters. I've worked in 2 or 3 areas, initially on health systems financing, so I could understand some of the earlier presentations on financing. And then I've been, in the last 10 to 15 years, more heavily involved in promoting the systems for health and what we can do at WHO to help countries to do that. I've organized my presentation into 3 parts. Each part addresses a question that over my career of working in this area, I get asked. The first part is health is in all policies. And the question that has prompted that response is that people say, well, what does transport have to do with health? What does tourism have to do with health? What does housing and urban planning have to do with health? What's the connection? What is economic policy? Inflation rates, what does it have to do with health? The second part is health should be a standard. It should be in all policies. And for that, you'll see some arguments presented. And in that, I'm responding to the questions, yes, but you health people, you just want to rule everything, and we've got other interests, that, we have to think about, and health isn't really, population health isn't really aligned with these other interests, the economy, growth, sustainability, social stability, etc. And finally, yes, health can be in all policies. No. It's a nice idea, it's true, people say, but it can't work. There isn't a way, there isn't a model. How can we do that? It's too complicated. So I've basically summarized what I'm going to present to you now, but let's go on and see some more nuances and hopefully some interesting facts. I start off with a global picture. I always like to go from a global overview. We're talking about health, but one way that health is measured is very close to you and very close to your children and your family and to me. And that is what is our life expectancy. That is how health is measured. And here you can see a very nice overview. It is taken from 2007, but to be honest, the picture has not changed too much. But it does show a trend from 30 years, roughly, for different regions of the world. And you can see for the high-income OECD countries, like Switzerland, we've had very big improvements from 71 to 78 years of life expectancy over that period, on average. You can see some areas like Sub-Saharan Africa, and CEE and CIS countries, which are the former Soviet Union bloc countries, where in the latter case there was a decrease over that period, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, very little change. So those are 2 anomalies, I would say. So from that picture, if we know life expectancy is important to us, we're also interested to understand what shortens people's life expectancy. And WHO in 2016 produced a global analysis. This is probably one of the large comprehensive analyses to say, to what can we attribute death in a particular year? And if you take the 56 million deaths occurring every year, you can look at what is causing them with very complex analyses to look at what causes the burden, what burdens of disease are caused by which factors. And here you'll just see illustratively of the 56 million that 12.6 are linked to environment, 11.3 to dietary risks, physical activity, malnutrition. Just a few of the other ones are put there. We haven't put tobacco, for example, which would again take up another big circle. So we have in the health sector the data to show the links between health and what's causing shortening of life expectancy. So the hypothesis for health in all policies is that the societal conditions we live in are in fact affecting our life expectancy and our health. Why? Because the conditions you experienced this morning when you woke up, with the transport you took here, with this very auditorium we sit in, have a direct impact on our health, often measured through environmental exposure. A second rationale is that the social conditions that we live in also predict the differences in our health. So if you're looking as a politician or as a leader in society to govern a fair neighborhood, a fair canton, a fair country, you'll be interested to see if there's variation and if certain social groups are continually disadvantaged. And we know that the factors affecting how we live are affecting our life expectancy and the inequalities in life expectancy. And these same conditions structure then the behaviors that we assume. If we, at a late night, we might go and have a cigarette outside, or if we can have it in the bar, if we decide to have another drink, or 2 or 3 drinks, etc. In fact, this phenomenon has been studied for a long time, and here are 2 frameworks. There are many more, which are not frameworks, they're more pie charts. People produce these pie charts to show the percentage that they think of certain categories of our societal conditions which influence a society's health. And here you can see 30 to 50% or more are coming not through the health systems, which are incredibly important as well. The systems for caring for our health, servicing, repairing, but also these other societal conditions are important, and the systems themselves for care are also influenced by these other societal conditions. Finally, we have quite a number of longitudinal studies around the globe which show that differences accumulate. If a woman is starting in childhood with a 6-year difference, let's say the difference between the highest income quintile and the lowest income quintile in a country, and then goes to working years, that difference accumulates 19 years between the highest income quintile and the lowest, and by later in life, even up to 22 years. And you can see for men also a pattern with 5, 17, and 22. So this accumulation process, these societal conditions will be influencing our longevity prospects and inequalities in that. So what are they? Well, we have even further good news in the sense that we've recently in the European region done a huge study, maybe 5 years in the making, where we've tried to translate some of these more scientific longitudinal studies and very difficult studies where you do calculations on burden of disease into 5 key messages for policy makers. And this graphic and these numbers in the study illustrate the calculations showed that what's holding people back from good health and a decent life can be 10%, this is in Europe, so it's context specific, attributed to inequity in access to health services. We're fortunate in the European region to have a fairly well-developed infrastructure for health services relative to, I think, almost every other region in the world. 35%, however, is attributed to financial insecurity. You just can't make ends meet. You have to you have to pay, the classic example which comes a lot in the Eastern European countries is around food security compared with energy and the warming of houses in winter and trading off warmth and food. Poor quality of housing and underdevelopment and unsafe neighborhoods, 29%. 19% attributed to lack of trust, agency, a feeling of being unempowered, not belonging, and the general quality of education and the empowerment that education gives. And 7% a lack of decent work or poor working conditions. So that's a picture, and this is the first one we've done as a World Health Organization, covering so many countries with up-to-date information on through tracking policies and the conditions, societal conditions across countries in not only the European Union, but far broader, because the WHO region is including about, it's 40 countries, 40 or 45. So that was the section of my presentation where I wanted to answer any question you had about whether health is affected by all policies. The next part of the question is, well, if it is affected, but really, okay, it's affected, but isn't that people's luck in life? It doesn't really then affect other things so much, does it? Well, let's address that question. Firstly, the conditions of society are important for well-functioning healthcare systems. Here we did a study a few years back looking at hundreds of studies in the literature where people were interviewed about why they weren't using healthcare services appropriately, perhaps they didn't return for follow-up visits, interviews also perhaps with the healthcare providers themselves. What did they see as problems with why their patients were completing, for example, TB treatments, and so on. With the researchers, we grouped the categories of the conditions affecting the healthcare systems under socioeconomic constraints. Obviously, payment issues and fees were a big issue, and co-payments. But also, there were demographic and jurisdictional constraints. You weren't allowed to use a health service in another part of the country, for example. Or you were, if we come to the third reason, knowledge and education. You weren't able to follow the treatment schedule that you were given because of your low education. There were political or institutional constraints also related to opening hours, the times of the week, the days of the week that the institutions were open, the ability of working people to then access them outside of working hours, and so on. And then social gender norms related to also communication, stigma against certain population groups, and so on. So our societal conditions are important to have effective healthcare systems, because without people using healthcare systems properly, we waste an enormous amount of resources. And part of the story of antibiotic resistance and the growth in antibiotic resistance is related to these factors. And the parts are also related to, obviously, the use of antibiotics in animal health as well, and overprescribing. But this is part of the picture. Again, in the study in Europe, they showed on this point that TB reduction requires action on poverty. And if action is not taken, then the diagnosis process and treatment process is ineffective. And this will eventually lead to increasing TB rates after we had that disease so-called under control in the developed world. So we're looking at, across the European region, that TB would decline by 76% with expanded social protection policies. Well, another reason, people don't care about it. You know, don't worry about, it shouldn't be in health, shouldn't be in all policies, because it's not something valued by people or by the politicians. Well, here's a happy study which shows that when you study adult life satisfaction, you see health emerging in many ways. For example, mother's mental health during family and schooling, emotional and behavioral health for the child. In the adult situation, crime, which is related to intentional injuries, physical health, mental health, and finally, we have a concept of how satisfied we are with our life. And health is linked in all ways through our path in life. And then, if you're the politician, the studies show that life satisfaction has a very important influence over the pattern of voting, but also the participation in voting. We live in an era where no one can avoid having heard of climate change and the Sustainable Development Agenda, regardless of your position on the matter. And so there's a rising interest in concepts like the circular economy, sort of zero growth economies that will still yield full employment, a sustainable environment, and social equity. And clearly, what we can do for people's health in terms of ensuring that everyone can expect good life expectancy is part of the solution to this broader challenge in society. I took this diagram from Patrick Bordenman from Lausanne. There's the famous diagram in this first slide comes from America, from colleagues in New York who work on equity. And it really talks about how we can build the policies that help everyone to have a fair chance to see the game. You can use the game of basketball as the analogy for the game of life or the experience of life. And here in Switzerland, we watch the cows having a fight. So I thought that was a nice interpretation of the last American cartoon. The final point to make is that as a global society, we have in fact enshrined in the international law the general comment to the right to health, which is, as a global human species, the highest collective action, you could say, or that we've taken, is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And linked to this, we have the right to maternal, child, and reproductive health, the right to healthy, natural, and workplace environments, the right to prevention and the treatment and control of disease, and the right to health facilities, goods, and services. Finally, the study again in Europe talked about the 5 essential conditions needed to live a healthy life and to have healthy life expectancy. And in each case showed, well, are we on the right track? So why should health be in all policies? Well, it shouldn't if we're on the right track, because then probably we're doing everything correctly. But even looking at Europe, which is doing a lot of things correctly, we see that out-of-pocket payments in the health sector has increased in 60% of countries. Social protection expenditure has decreased by 50% overall. 53% of countries are actually disinvesting in housing and neighborhood facilities. And 50% of all new jobs created in Europe since 2008 are insecure, and 80% of those are occupied by the lowest income quintiles. I think this is an argument on why we should be looking at health in all policies. And finally, for those who are not persuaded by social equity, there is an efficiency argument as well as an environmental degradation argument. And this study shows that if policies were more aligned, in other words, that they currently aren't aligned as they should be, in energy, climate issues, air quality, and health, you could have a 40% of total cost savings. So that's the efficiency argument for improved policy coherence. So now we've heard the arguments, the evidence, the arguments, and now, is it possible? Well, what is it? The health in all policies approach is really about promoting healthy public policy. It's a way of working across government to encourage all sectors to consider the health impacts of their policies and practices. It's based on the understanding that population health is largely influenced by social, economic, political, and cultural determinants. The health in all policies approach examines the contribution that a healthier population can make to other sectors' goals or to the broader social challenges we face today. Population health has positive impacts on productivity, sustainability, and the economy. For us at the global level and for many countries at the national level, the Sustainable Development Agenda is a game changer because it facilitates us to see a number of goals for our societies at more equal terms, I would say. And so the goals were summarized as goals around people, which is a lot to do with life expectancy and the well-being of people, prosperity, which is a lot to do around the resources we have as people and societies, peace, which needs no explanation, partnership, how we can work together to achieve all these issues, and planet, having a safe, sustained environment. With that vision set at the international level for every country, it does provide a reinvigorated view, I would say, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's what every citizen and what every country should be aspiring to for its people and the global community as a whole. Leaving no one behind is enshrined within this concept, is that it's about all people being able to share in prosperity, peace, and the planet, and in partnership in a fair way. So we see from the evidence from public health that the health agenda is linked to many of the different goal targets set under this broader umbrella of the agenda. And I'll highlight just a few that we've discussed probably in the last 15 minutes. Obviously, water, sanitation, and hygiene. Obviously, workplace health promotion, safe consumption, cities that have clean air, health literacy in schools, and so on, violence prevention. And the health sector already has some of the solution for all of these issues in terms of the links with health and these issues. Health can be in all policies because we've gained a lot of experience as a health sector. And this is as a sector that's primarily interested not only in the repair of disease, but in terms of promoting the health of the population. This experience on how to deal with the conditions that people are living in can set us well for going forward. In fact, when the Sustainable Development Agenda came out, it was a huge opportunity at WHO to look at all the interlinkages which we've worked on in different public health programs and to make the knowledge much more broadly available and to also concentrate on partnerships for the solutions to the problems in each of the areas. We've also, in the last, I would say, seen 5 to 10 years, probably a greater packaging of information for policymakers and for managers, decision makers. If you're a manager for health in a particular region, what packages do you have that represent good services within your health systems and services? But what can you advise others across the different government sectors regarding other impacts on health? So there's been a more concentrated effort on how to control diseases through policies in other sectors. Again, in Europe, with our big study, the calculations showed macroeconomic policies that could actually reduce inequities, and that can have quite a short time lag. So let me pick one statistic, because I'm not going to go through them all. Let me pick... a 2 to 4 year lag for 24 countries. Let's say if you decreased income inequality by 1 Gini percentage point. Gini is the index used to measure income inequality in societies. So we've seen also this slide previously, but we've actually also been tracking policies in other sectors. At a global level, we started a project as well, which we'll be working on, hopefully also with the OECD, to start looking more clearly at tracking the policies with a view to looking at their impacts on the conditions for health. In practice, governments have started to generate frameworks that are useful for situating these broader intersectoral issues on the conditions for health and well-being. And here you'll see an example from Healthy Island, where the framework of actions looks a lot around partnership, around governance, around intersectoral actions, around addressing inequalities. And internationally, we have a generic framework for action which underpins our work on health in all policies, and a formal definition which says that the health in all policies is an approach to public policies that systematically takes into account the health implications of decisions, seeks synergies, and avoids harmful health impacts. In other words, refrains from those activities that harm health and are shown to harm health, in order to improve health and health equity through acting on the conditions necessary for health. And in this framework, which we will go into more detail in the next session, you'll see that it's about establishing the needs and priorities for what is of mutual interest across different public policy areas, identify what existing supportive structures exist and processes, framing the planned actions to be taken jointly, whether it's urban design, whether it's transport, whether it's to do with energy use, and so on. Facilitate assessment and engagement, building capacity for understanding the determinants, the evidence base of health, for the conditions of health, and establishing monitoring and evaluation systems that don't just report on, not for the health system as a caring system for its expenditures, but also report on the conditions for health and the impacts that the changes in societal conditions are having on the health of the population. We also know it means a new role, and at WHO we've reorganized the organization around 3 key principles and 3 key targets. The third target relates to ensuring healthier populations. This is the first time the organization has been organized in this way in 20 years. In fact, when I first arrived at WHO, it was. And then since then, we've had a big drive on health systems, but we have not at all focused on intersectoral policies. And now that scenario is changing. But what is very uncomfortable for people coming from health, when they know the health sector, they know about diseases, they know about care, is having to play almost a new role where you have to be a leader in terms of putting forward the evidence on the health impacts. But a leader also understands what's at stake for broader society, which requires the health person to have a broader perspective on what are the social challenges in their current environment. It requires being a partner, so being a co-convener, being able to commission the evidence that's necessary for another sector in order for them to make their argument that they want to expand social housing, or they want to control better control over the prices of rent, or that they might want to reduce emissions by cars in Switzerland, and so on. And finally, the role of negotiator, which is very important for anyone working in any leadership position. But when you're negotiating across, again, different interest groups, you need to be able to use technical information from with your own sector, but also be comfortable with technical information from other sectors, and ensure that there's legislative coherence in the way the state deals with the conditions for prosperity, peace, and for people and their health. So within the field of health in all policies, there are 4 strategies that have been identified. One is the win-win strategy. For example, there's very strong evidence that providing healthy school lunches or subsidizing lunches promotes learning, and also linked to health outcomes related to obesity and later on in life NCDs. The cooperation strategy focuses around what are the benefits to the whole of government, thinking of the example of saving money by having better policy coherence between energy, health, and climate change and air pollution. There are the policies related to health at the core. The seatbelt policy is a classic example of a policy that's enacted in another sector, governed by the ministries of transport, but the case has been made that people don't question it too much at all. It's just given as a norm. The same could be said for water standards, the quality of water, and so on, which is dealt with often by the ministries dealing with environment and water, but the standards are set by WHO related to health. And then damage limitation. We can't avoid everything. We know that, for example, working on shift work, irregular shifts of work, night work, is not good for health, but it's impossible to avoid in many instances, and so there needs to be ways that people's health can be, the damage to people's health can be limited. For example, having a place where people can rest and take breaks. Is that my 5-minute warning? Yes? Okay. All right. And furthermore, there are resources for implementation. So if you're thinking of working in this area, or if there are lots of resources, particularly since 2006, 2007. In fact, one of the leading advocates for this area is the Finnish government, and they launched a book called Health in All Policies in 2006 when they were chairing the European Union. We at WHO produced a training manual which enables you to run workshops with people to communicate some of the important linkages between the conditions for health and population health and well-being. There's been a host since, in the last 5-10 years, there's been a host of other guidance materials developed in Australia. I'm showing you mostly the English-speaking ones, but there are some Francophone ones. German, I'm not sure, sorry. And also fact sheets and research papers are available on this topic. There is finally a network of countries where institutions, whether they be local government, regional or state government or national governments, join this network to share experiences and to further the agenda of working on health in all policies and making it more well known. That's the members that were, the map shows the members around about the launch of this network in 2017. The network was launched. And there's a lot we can say about the emerging practice that we have. In coming together, these countries have identified that it's very important that there's a good governance of the health in all policies process, that there's recognition both in the Ministry of Health or the Department of Health, there's recognition in central government. Sometimes the governance is linked to a particular public health legislation, but it need not be. It is the case in South Australia and Quebec, in Wales and Finland, for example. It's based on partnership, very much around design, co-designing, co-delivery, and then the co-benefits that you can obtain by having the perspective of health in the other policy sectors, design and delivery. It's also necessary to have some dedicated capacity and resources to work on this. It can't just happen silently without 1 or 2 or 3 people paying attention to it in any particular administration. And the use of the evidence and the evaluation of the impacts, but of other conditions on health has been very instrumental. So about 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting, second meeting held of the Global Network for Health in All Policies, and I would say the network is growing. It's survived its first 2 years. It's a voluntary network, informal group of practitioners who want to share between each other how to implement this important agenda. Thank you for your time. Cheers.